You've probably heard that Vikings were fierce warriors. But have you ever wondered how they survived something far more dangerous than swords and axes? Not battles, not raids, but the cold. Imagine being trapped on a wooden ship in the middle of a frozen sea, soaked to the bone, no roof above you, no modern gear, and no chance to turn back. Yet somehow, they didn't freeze. They didn't crumble. They kept going. Tonight, we're not talking about glory or conquest. We're talking about blankets, hot stones, shared breath, and survival tricks so clever that even modern explorers still use them today. Stay with me, and by the end of this story, you'll know exactly how medieval Vikings turned their ships into floating furnaces, and how they cheated death with nothing but wool, fire, and stubbornness. Chapter 1. The North Atlantic. A sea meant to kill, not carry. You might imagine a Viking voyage as a loud adventure war cries, creaking wood, crashing waves. But in truth, before a single oar dipped into the sea, the journey began in silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of men who already understood that nature, not enemy swords, would be their greatest threat. They were not sailing across calm blue waters. They were entering the North Atlantic, an ocean so cold and violent that even modern steel ships struggled against it. In winter, the surface temperature hovered just above freezing, the kind of water that could pull the breath from your lungs in seconds and kill your muscles before you even realized you were dying. The wind did not simply blow. It carved at exposed skin, drawing tears that froze before they could fall. Salt crusted on eyebrows like frost. Even breathing became a labor, air slicing down the throat like broken glass. And yet the Vikings had only open-air longships, no cabins, no below-deck shelter, no enclosed space at all. Their vessels were designed not for comfort or survival, but for speed and maneuverability. The hulls were slim and shallow, meant to ride atop waves rather than cut through them. That design made them perfect for quick landings and sudden raids, but disastrous for warmth. Every gust of wind passed straight through the rows of oarsmen. Every surge of seawater crashed over their laps. When it rained, they were soaked. When it snowed, it clung to their cloaks until it melted and froze again. There were no fires on board. Fire and wooden tarred planks did not mix well, and even if someone dared to strike a flame, the wind would smother it instantly. Instead of warmth, they relied on layered wool, woven so tightly that water beaded on its surface instead of soaking through. Underneath, they wore sheepskins or reindeer hides, oily and dense, trapping air like primitive insulation. But these garments grew heavier as the journey stretched on, soaked by spray, stiffened by salt. Sleeping was done sitting upright, cloaks wrapped over heads, faces buried into knees. The cold did not allow softness. To lie down was to lose heat. To take off gloves was to lose fingers. Their meals were equally pragmatic. Before leaving land, they packed hard bread, dried fish, fermented butter, smoked meat, and barrels of sour ale, not because they enjoyed it, but because it would not spoil. Eating was not a pleasure, but fuel. Food was chewed slowly to conserve body heat. Water was rarely drunk directly. Instead, they consumed ale or diluted mead, because fresh water froze or spoiled quickly. Salt stiffened lips. Cracked skin bled without sensation. The crew spoke little. The cold made talking exhausting, and words offered no protection. Instead, they conserved their strength. Each man focused on breathing slowly, rhythmically, keeping his core warm, as if willing his heart to stay steady. They did not think of destination only the next minute, the next breath, the next wave not large enough to overturn them. Before departure, rituals were performed on land. A goat might be sacrificed. Runes might be cast. They did not ask for glory. They asked simply not to vanish at sea. They knew what happened to those who failed. Bodies swallowed by the ocean were never returned. There would be no burial mounds, no carved stones, no songs. To die in battle earned you a saga. To die of cold earned you silence, and yet they went willingly. Why? Was it greed? Faith? Duty? Or had survival itself become so familiar that even death at sea felt like another form of living? The truth was more practical. Trade, settlement, and opportunity lay across those waters. Iceland, Greenland, even the distant coast of North America all demanded crossing the same lethal passage. The ocean was not an obstacle. It was a toll gate. Those who endured it were allowed new life. Those who failed were forgotten. But here lies the question that puzzled later historians. How did medieval Vikings, without fire, without shelter, without modern cold weather protection, avoid simply freezing to death? Was it their clothing? Their shipbuilding? Their bodies? Or something far less visible, something within the mind rather than the muscle? Chapter 2. Cloaks of Ice and Fire. The surprising science of Viking winter clothing. To the untrained eye, a Viking wrapped in furs and wool might look like any other barbarian bundled against the cold. But their clothing system was not random, it was engineered. Every layer had a purpose, tested by generations of sailors who learned the hard way that a single mistake at sea could freeze a man solid in hours. A typical Viking sailor didn't dress merely to stay warm. He dressed to control moisture, trap air, and block wind. In modern terms, they used a three-part thermal strategy, long before science explained why it worked. 1. The inner layer. Sweat control before it kills you. Viking voyages were not gentle cruises. Rowing demanded constant motion, and in freezing temperatures, sweat was deadly. If moisture soaked into your underclothes, it would freeze against your skin, dropping your temperature faster than seawater itself. So Viking sailors wore soft linen or thin wool tunics as their base layer, not for warmth, but for absorption. Archaeologists excavating graves in Birka and Hiddeby found undergarments stitched from tightly woven flax fibers, capable of wicking moisture away from the skin. Not unlike modern thermal underwear, some even used sea mammal gut fabric. Waterproof and breathable, worn like a second skin. Imagine wearing a shirt made out of treated seal intestine, not fashionable, but astonishingly efficient. The rule was simple. A dry warrior lives. A wet one feeds the sea. 2. The middle layer. Air, nature's heating system. Once sweat was contained, trapped air became the furnace. Vikings wore thick, brushed wool tunics and trousers, beaten and roughed until they puffed with volume. Wool, especially from Icelandic sheep, naturally develops two kinds of fibers. Tod, the long, oily hairs that repel water. Pell, the soft, crimped underwool that traps air. Together, they turned a Viking's clothing into a wearable insulation chamber. The thicker the air pockets, the warmer the man. Sagas even tell of sheep being chosen for their winter beards, denser fleece that produced superior seagoing garments. Viking women, who were master weavers, sometimes spent over a year crafting a single ship captain's sailing cloak. That cloak was worth as much as a sword, because out on the water, it was his defense. 3. The outer layer. Turning storms into shields. Finally, the most misunderstood Viking invention, the felted wool cloak, compressed under heat, pressure, and moisture until it became nearly waterproof. Add a coating of fish oil or animal fat, and you had what historians call the medieval Gore-Tex. These cloaks were so effective that wind and sleet simply rolled off them. And when ice formed, the sailor could crack it off like a shell. For extreme voyages through Arctic seas, Vikings added fur-lined leather capes or reindeer pelt mantles, fastening them with bronze or antler brooch large enough to be undone with frozen fingers. Hoods were pulled long and low, sometimes extending to the mouth, not for fashion, but to warm the air before breathing it, reducing frost damage to the lungs. Even their feet were fortresses, forget fragile leather shoes. Viking sailors wore boots lined with straw, not as padding, but as replaceable insulation. Wet straw was tossed, dry straw added. Some used felt booties layered inside sealskin, creating a barrier that modern polar explorers actually copied centuries later. They knew that frozen feet meant lost toes, and lost toes meant lost balance at sea. In truth, a Viking sailor was not merely dressed, he was encased. Every seam, every hem, was the result of centuries of survival science passed through needles and looms. But clothing alone didn't save them. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the floor beneath them. Their ship was made of ice-cold oak that drank heat from their bodies like a silent predator. So how did they survive that? Chapter 3: Fire Beneath Their Feet. How Viking ships became floating hearths. Most people imagine Viking ships as open, icy platforms, bare wooden floors slick with frost. Sailors huddled in silence as wind howled across the North Sea. And yes, the cold was relentless. But what many don't realize is that Vikings did not simply endure it. They strategized against it. A Viking ship was not just a vessel, it was a thermal ecosystem. 1. The deck wasn't bare wood, it was a living bed of warmth. Archaeological finds from ship burials like Oseberg and Gokstad reveal that Viking sailors didn't sleep directly on the cold planks. They layered the ship floor with hay, straw, and even animal pelts, turning the hull into a cushioned thermal barrier. Above the straw came woolen blankets and sheepskins, creating a multi-layered insulation system. Much like a modern sleeping platform, the goal? To prevent heat loss by conduction. Vikings didn't know the scientific term, but they knew the bite of cold oak. Some sagas even mention captains assigning specific warriors to guard the bedding from seawater, replacing soaked layers mid-voyage like battlefield repairs. 2. Small fires, yes fires, were used on deck. It sounds insane, fire on a wooden ship. But evidence suggests that Vikings used controlled braziers, especially near the center of the ship, shielded by iron pans or clay basins. These weren't roaring flames, but slow-burning embers, fed with pine pitch resin or animal fat. They didn't aim to heat the whole ship. They aimed to heat stone. 3. Stone flasks, the original medieval hot water bottles before setting sail. Viking sailors heated smooth river stones in a fire until they were scorching hot. Then they wrapped them in wool or leather and placed them inside bedding or under cloaks. These warm stones, described in Icelandic sagas as eldsteiner, firestones, radiated heat for hours. Some were held against the stomach or between the thighs, a survival trick still used by Arctic explorers today. A single stone could stave off frostbite, and a dozen could turn a freezing night into a tolerable 1-4. Thermal tactics and shifts. Contrary to movie scenes of entire crews rowing nonstop, Vikings worked in shifts. While one half rowed, the other half rested under shared blankets, using body heat pooling as insulation. They slept in pairs or groups, back to back or chest to chest, covered by cloaks like a human furnace. It wasn't weakness. It was military efficiency. Even the sagas honor warmth strategy. Better to share heat with a brother than freeze with pride. 5. Their diet was engineered for internal heat. Cold burns calories, and Vikings ate accordingly. Their sea rations were not random. Dried fish rich in omega fats, hard cheese that softened in warmth, smoked whale or seal meat, thick barley gruel mixed with butter or lard. Some accounts even mention blood broth, heated from animal blood mixed with herbs, delivering both iron and heat in one grim but effective drink. These weren't just meals. They were fuel blocks designed to burn slowly inside the body like biological firewood. 6. Wind shielding. Cloaks and oars as barricades when icy winds howled across the sea. Viking crews raised spare shields or oars along the rails, forming a makeshift wind wall. They even propped up cloaks like tarps, turning open decks into canvas tents. They were exposed, but never undefended. The final truth: Vikings didn't survive the cold, it by being unnaturally tough. They survived it by being unnaturally smart. It's tempting to imagine Viking warriors as ice-blooded berserkers who felt no cold. But the truth is far more impressive. They did not deny the cold. They engineered around it. They layered air. They trapped heat. They shared warmth. And they turned oak, wool, fire, and stone into weapons more powerful than any axe. In the end, survival wasn't just about strength. It was a science of warmth, mastered 1,000 years before thermodynamics. And that brings us to the end of tonight's quiet journey across icy seas. If you're still awake, thank you for staying with me. And if you drifted off somewhere between wool cloaks and whale oil lamps, well, that means I did my job before you go. I'd love it if you'd tap the like button. It helps more sleepy historians find their way here. And if you enjoy peaceful stories of boring bravery, consider subscribing to Quiet Boring Sleep. There's plenty more slow adventures waiting for you. Rest well, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next story.